All right, boys, welcome to BBL. This time, round one of playoffs, where we are going up against Obo. If you are new to the channel, you're just watching through BBL and you don't know Obo, check him out in the top right-hand corner, is someone who's genuinely like a brother to me. I've known him for almost a decade. He's lived with me on and off, and this is our biggest Pokemon battle yet. We've had a lot of battles over the years, but none have had nearly as big a playoff or any implications as this game. So boys, if you're excited for that, be sure to leave a like on the video and be sure to tune in tomorrow to watch this playoff battle. We did play Obo in the regular season. We actually played him week 1 and we ended up pulling off a dub, which was through double paras, back-to-back paras from a Raging Bolt Thunderbolt on both Grimmsnarl as well as Iron Boulder. Looking back at that game, I'm not super in love with the team that we ended up bringing, and I'm sure Obo's the same because he's changed his team since then. Obo's new team consists of things like Roaring Moon, Conch, and Volcanion, where he did have something like Sneasler and Milotic the last time we played. So he's made a couple of changes, and honestly, they are positive changes for his team overall, and they are positive changes into our team. I'm going to break down this team as per usual. Thank you, Wagon Fruit, for really grinding out this team with me. I'm gonna be honest, I've been on a really big Cobblemon kick recently, so I was really just gonna play Cobblemon and half-ass this team. But Obo reached out to Zooch, who's an awesome person, by the way. I've had a lot of fun talking and mess with him over the past week. He's a very good player, obviously. He just won some team tournament, some very good team tournament, showdown team tournament, and was one of the best players on that team. So he's a very good player. He reaches out and he helps certain individuals, but Obo reached out to him for building help for some video for Zooch's channel. So Obo called in one of the better players in Showdown to get help to beat me. And I mean, he needs it, man. I cannot blame him at all. With that being said, Obo, me, and Zooch have been talking a lot of mess recently, and they lit a fire under my ass. So now I'm going to try my best to win this game. Where I was gonna half-ass it, I was feeling a little bit burnt out, specifically on Ubers. It does feel like very taxing. It's very mentally taxing. I'll make a retrospective video at the end probably, but with how many sets are viable each and every week and how much you really have to prepare and you have to dig under everything to really think of everything that could possibly come, it's very taxing. It's very so mentally taxing. And even with that winter break, I'm not really back in the swing of things yet, so I was really not going to put forth my best effort on this team, and that's not fair to Obo, that's not fair to you guys. So I'm glad that this happened because now I'm able to give you guys a good game and a good team that I think we built. It's a little crazy, but Wagon and I are very proud of this build, and we think that it'll be able to end up winning. So as far as Obo's team, he did change it up. Like I said before, he does have Groudon, TERA, Raging Bolt, which is basically an Uber. It's probably the best Pokemon on the board that is not an Uber. Screamtail, Rillaboom, Roaring Moon, Skarmory, Volcanion, Conch, and Porygon 2. So if you remember last time, I said that we matched up poorly into Groudon and Raging Bolt, but the rest of the team I felt pretty confident into. This time, he picked up both Volcanion and Roaring Moon, which are two Pokemon that I actually think match up pretty well into me. Roaring Moon, at first glance, wouldn't match up very well into my team at all, but if you look a little bit deeper, a little bit under the surface here, even though we have two fairy types, he could be Banded, he could be Proto Attack, he could even be Proto Speed to outspeed things like a +1 DD, Cure Black, and he gets Iron Head. Iron Head, Stone Edge, Knockoff, and U-Turn are really all he needs in this matchup. He could be last move Scale Shot, last move Earthquake if he really wanted to, or Dragon Claw, some sort of Dragon Stab. But I really don't foresee that. I really see those first 4 moves that I talked about because those first 4 moves do well. I anticipate Life Orb, Band, or Scarf, some sort of boosting item in some general direction. Like I said, speed boosting would primarily be here for the Cure Black because speed boosting does not outspeed Booster Boulder, which does look very good into his team. Attack boosting would be very hard for us to switch into, and an Iron Head, Weezing, Fizdef Weezing does not really switch into that too well. I think he can take 1 maybe, and if he's banded, I can't. And he also has the ability to run Adamant in this matchup if he does not respect our Azelf, which he really shouldn't. I haven't brought it to a single game. I don't know why he would. So Roaring Moon, it doesn't look like it does great because we have Grimmstar, we have Weezing Galar, but under the surface, it actually does do very, very well and is very, very difficult for us to pivot into that Pokemon, especially under Sun. So, I mean, let's go ahead and knock it out of the way, man. Speaking of Sun, Groudon is the next Pokemon I'm going to talk about. That Pokemon is going to come no matter what. I don't have realistic answers to that Pokemon, and thank goodness Obo didn't know how to use it week 1, and he brought Sub instead of Overheat, because he could have just been Overheat, and he could have absolutely sent my Weezing Galar pack, and just mixed Overheat, absolutely smokes us, and he could absolutely beat that set here. I don't really know what his set on Groudon is going to be, because like him in Raging Bolt, there are so many different sets for those two specifically that work in this matchup. It's very hard to pin down what he wants to be, and really it depends on the rest of his team comp. Kind of what I gauge as being the best sets in this matchup are, in my opinion, like a Fat Slow Swords Dance set is really good. He could be a Scarf variant is very good, but it does get outsped by Kyurem Black and Booster Boulder, so maybe not so much of that. Assault Vest makes a ton of sense to be a pivot into the Gholdengo, and then there's a ton of other sets that he could be. He could be just be max speed offensive with Swords Dance, doesn't even need to be fat. He could be Lumberry. Lumberry makes a ton of sense as well. He could be Spikes if he really wanted to, or Stealth Rocks on Groudon if he really wanted to. But offensively, I feel like it's a better piece than defensively, so I really expect like AV, Swords Dance, or some sort of Lumberry, probably the most. And it's very hard for our team to deal with. We have some fat Pokemon, and we're going to talk about it a little bit later, but last time the combination of Grimmsnarl and Boulder was how I planned to deal with it. We were Terra Grass on Boulder in that first matchup with Solar Blade, which was going to do a ton of damage to him. Unfortunately, it didn't get to show off because it got parried by the Raging Bolt, but Groudon is extremely difficult for us to pivot into. The next Pokemon is Raging Bolt. And unfortunately, there are very many types that Raging Bolt can run in this matchup. The 4 of which that I think are the best are Water and Fire, are probably the 2 that are the most scary. Ghost to be able to spin block is another very viable option that I think could make an appearance, and then Steel I think also makes a ton of sense, but the least sense out of those, because we do have Ho-Oh in the Sun, we could be Terra Fire on Boulder. It just isn't as great of a defensive type into my team specifically, especially under the Sun, as the first 3. He could also be Fairy. Fairy is definitely an option as well. So, but Fairy and Steel are the 2 that I kind of expect the least. I kind of just expect them because they're good types. I think Water, Fire, and Ghost make the most sense. As far as a set, I don't know, man. He could literally be anything. He could be Booster, which wouldn't make a ton of sense because of the Sun, but he could be to have it proc outside of the Sun. He could be Specs with like Volt Switch, Thunderbolt, Draco, Thunderclap. That does very well. Weather Ball is something that he could tack on. If he's Terra Fire, he's probably some sort of Calm Mind variant. If he's Ghost, I expect him to be some sort of Calm Mind Rest variant with dual stabs. This Pokemon can do so much in the matchup, and if you look at our team, you search up and down, there is no reasonable answer to this Pokemon. The way that we beat it is by its speed tier being lackluster into our team. We can beat it with screens on Grimmsnarl potentially, or by tricking it with like Gholdengo potentially, or just doing some damage overall, forcing the Terra off so it can take more damage from like Sacred Fire from Ho-Oh. It really is tough for our team to deal with. Those 2 are the toughest Pokemon. Past that, there are 2 other Pokemon that I think should always come, the first of which is Screamtail. It's not great in the matchup, and I'm not going to pretend like it is, but something like a Stealth Rock Flamethrower set, or even like a Screen set, it could be Rocks, it could have Encore, it could have Thunder Wave, D-Gleam. Like, there's a lot of moves that Screamtail could be, but realistically, it should be here to outspeed in the Sun a +1 Kyurem Black and either Encore it, D-Gleam it, or Thunder Wave it. D-Gleam being the worst of those options because I think Kyurem Black with Weakness Policy is a very realistic possibility here, but it should come to outspeed things, get that potential Encore off into us, and it's very hard for us to deal with like that. We do have some Pokemon that can abuse it, but overall that Pokemon is very tough. And the last Pokemon that I think should come no matter what is going to be Volcanion. Offensively, we have nothing. Defensively, we do not switch into Volcanion at all. His offensive stabs are impossible for us to switch into because our water type is Swampert, and things like Kyurem Black don't want to be burned because they really want to be physical in this matchup. I'll touch on that in a minute. But so we don't really have great pivots into fire and water at all. And even then, he gets Focus Blast for Kyurem Black. He gets stuff like Will-O-Wisp to burn us if he doesn't want the Steam Eruption. Like, Volcanion is extremely annoying, and in my opinion, going to be the 3rd most annoying Pokemon outside of Groudon and Raging Bolt on his team. It's very hard for us to deal with. The only positive thing is that I don't think he's going to run Boots, so if we do get Rocks up, that 25% is going to be great. I think as far as an item goes, I think AV makes some sense. I think Citrus makes a lot of sense for him to be like a fat Kyurem Black check, physically defensive. I think it makes sense. I don't really think Scarf comes. Specs could come. Offensively, it does well. Scarf doesn't make the most sense to me because almost everything that I could Scarf potentially, Gholdengo, Ho-Oh, Kyurem Black, Iron Boulder, they outspeed him and they make him kind of useless. So Volcanion, it's tough, but it's manageable based on what we think he's going to bring. We just kind of have to get the right pivot at the right time. And then past that, I think any of his Pokemon can come in the last slot. I think all of them have use, except really Rillaboom. I don't really foresee Rillaboom coming. The only reason it came last time was to boost the Sneasler with Unburden. I don't really see a purpose for it this time. It could just to like deter ground boulder or something like that, but I really don't see it coming. Conk, Fizdef Conk does fantastic here. It's very hard for me to get reliable damage into. It's going to be Mach, Drain, Knock, and then last move like Earthquake. It could be Stone Edge. It could be Heavy Slam. What was it called? Heavy Press, Hard Press. That's what it's called for the Weezing. Conk is very hard for us to deal with in that sense. Skarmory also has the potential to come. It does help a little bit with Cure and Black, but not really, and it does help a lot with Boulder, but again, we are Tera, so we could just be Tera Fire to blow that Skarmory back. And then Porygon 2 is a weird one, because it could come, but it doesn't really check any of my Pokemon very well. It also loses to Goldingo pretty much always, no matter what variant we are, so it's kind of tough, in my opinion, to bring that Porygon 2, but he could bring it in that last slot. That could make total sense in his mind. I definitely could see it. Like a Trick Room variant with Conk under Trick Room could be hard for me to deal with. It really could. And I didn't mention it, but I'd be remiss to not mention that he has so many ways to break screens on his team. Brick Break on Groudon, Psychic Fangs on Screamtail, Brick Break on Roaring Moon, and Brick Break on Conk. And I think that's it, but there might be something else I'm forgetting. Even Rillaboom probably gets Brick Break, but I don't think Rillaboom's ever coming. So screens are not great into Obo because of how many ways he has to deal with it. The Pokemon on our team, Ho-Oh. Again, Ho-Oh... Surface level does good here because Fire Stab is super spammable into his team. Ground Stab for the Raging Bolt and for the Volcanion, which are the two things that resist fire. Ground plus Fire is just very good into Obo in general, and even then Flying doesn't have a ton of resist on his team. The tough part is choosing what set to do with Ho-Oh. I'm going to lay it all out on the table because I have a box of sets that I think did good into Obo, and I'm going to tell you guys why I thought they did good. So the first set that I looked at really consistently was just a Boots, Recover, Sacred Fire, Brave Bird, Earthquake set. This set I think makes a ton of sense here. If I don't bring some sort of removal, if you don't expect me to bring removal, I think Boots just makes the most sense. I don't really switch into anything to get knocked off unless I hard pivot on Rillaboom, but I do have other pivots otherwise into the Rillaboom, so I probably wouldn't do that if I built a team around this set. Like I said, Sacred Fire and Earthquake just does so much, and then Brave Bird to pick off potential KOs because I don't really need that last slot for anything except maybe Willow, and then Recover for longevity. It was a pretty simple set. It didn't serve a purpose necessarily. It was just hard for him to deal with and hard for him to switch into. The next Ho-Oh set that I really considered was Weakness Policy Flame Charge with the same three moves, Sacred Fire, Brave Bird, and Earthquake. The only problem with this is that Roaring Moon in the Sun is going to outspeed us. He's either going to be Scarf or speed boosting, one of the two, not both. And if he's that's brutal. He could be both, I guess, for Boulder if he's really that scared of it. But so there's not really a situation where I will ever get two flame charges off. It's just not happening. It is a very, very situational thing and very hard to play into. So I really never saw this Ho-Oh doing a whole lot of anything. Next up was a Calm Mind set. Calm Mind, Recover, Fire Blast, Earth Power. The same kind of idea there. Fire Blast plus Earth Power. Ground plus Fire does very well into him. It's very hard for him to deal with. The only thing there is the Roaring Moon beats us pretty much always. We had a Chardy Will-O-Wisp set. Chardy Willow, Recover, Sacred Fire, and Brave Bird. This set's really good. Willow's able to pick up a burn on the Roaring Moon and make it a lot less threatening. We can scout for the Lum on Groudon, potentially pretty scot-free. And we can stay in on Groudon and not be too worried about that, going for either the Sacred Fire burn or the Will-O-Wisp. And the last set that I considered on Ho-Oh, which was considered for a brief moment because I really struggled with Ho-Oh this week, man. No, a Calm Mind and Prison Thunderbolt Fire move set for Ho-Oh to beat the Raging Bolt. The only thing is that we didn't really beat the Raging Bolt with the lack of Recover, so I decided against that pretty much immediately, but it was an idea that was floating around. So overall, all that's to say, Ho-Oh, it doesn't do bad here. I'm not saying it does bad. It's hard to pick a set here for the Ho-Oh, and I'm not even sure that I picked the correct set, because I think there's a different set on Ho-Oh that works for each team that I have. And that's what I was talking about, where I was saying I was a little burnt out because I have to dig so deep to figure out these different sets because there's so many different sets that work every single matchup. I'm not confident I picked the right set on Ho-Oh, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Next up, Cure on Black, man, he still has a very poor Cure on Black matchup. The things that he picked up do not switch in. It's still going to be a very similar thing. Dragon Dance does very well, and Bandit does very well. I think those are my two options. I could also be boosting item with Life Orb to not lock a move, but it's pretty much always going to be some combination of Ice move, Dragon move, and Fusion Bolt. And I think it's the best Pokemon in the matchup once again. I think Raging Bolt has a case to be the best Pokemon in the matchup, but if not Raging Bolt, it is Cure on Black. Gholdengo's a little tough here, man, because Gholdengo's speed tier is very poor. Gholdengo's speed tier is horrible here because it gets outsped by the Groudon and the Roaring Moon, which are two things that threaten us that we don't pivot into. So that's bad. But that being said, he does not have pivots into Ghost and Steel. Not one on the team wants to pivot into those two moves. So Gholdengo's very powerful and very hard for him to switch into in general, and we can use Gholdengo in a couple of different ways to take advantage of that. A couple of different sets that I really thought of potentially are Scarf. We can trick Scarf onto like Raging Bolt, Specs. We can trick Specs onto Raging Bolt, try to lock it into Calm Mind on both of those trick options. I also had a trick Toxic Orb for a little bit. That was a set that was definitely considered. I had a Screens Gholdengo at one point with Light Clay, Reflect, Light Screen, Recover, and Make It Rain, because Make It Rain just does so much damage to everything. A Plot Recover set was not really considered here because I really don't anticipate it being the best set. And then a Super Bear was very tough to fit because we could either be a Super Berry for the Gholdengo, or sorry, for the Roaring Moon or the Groudon, but not both. So overall, Gholdengo does great, but again, it's kind of hard to pick and choose what set does the best. And then Boulder. Man, there were probably 8 or 9 Tera types highly considered for Boulder here. Let me read them off. So we thought of the Grass set originally from the first week was still good and still made a lot of sense. Fire made a lot of sense to break through Skarmory. Fighting made sense to push past things like Groudon, do extra damage with our Tera Fighting. Close combats, we thought of Fairy as well to help with the Roaring Moon. Ground was a high consideration to help it with the Raging Bolt and try to do more damage there. I even thought of some Misty Terrain, Tera Ground stuff to try to beat the Raging Bolt that way. Rock was obviously a consideration, it pretty much always is. Dragon was in consideration to have a switch into the Volcanion, and I guess I lied. I guess there were 7 types that were considered, not 8 or 9. But those types were all heavily considered. There's a lot of different ways to run Iron Boulder in this matchup. There's the typical set we had the last time: Boots, Mighty Cleave, Psycho Cut, Solar Blade, and Close Combat. Very simple set. It does what it needs to. It's very strong. We also have Banded. Banded with Tera Rock does really good and really limits his switch-ins. If he doesn't have Skarmory, if he doesn't have Conk, that Pokemon comes in and clicks Tera Rock, Mighty Cleave for free. There's also Swords Dance Booster, the in-game with either Tera Fighting or Tera Fire. It looks fantastic into his team. It's just very difficult to ever envision myself getting a Swords Dance off without a defensive Tera type like Water. Water was also considered. That was another one that was considered. Okay, it was shut down pretty quickly though because of Thunderbolt or Thunderclap and Grassy Glide. And then AV. AV was the last set that was considered to be a switch into the Raging Bolt. I thought that made a lot of sense and definitely deserved some consideration. And then past that, we're going to talk about the supporting cast, and we're going to talk about them fairly quickly. Grimmsnarl. Grimmsnarl is really cool here because I've never brought Parting Shot. I think maybe only once all season. Nobody is prepped for it. Nobody's brought Covert Cloak a single time. And Obo knows how I build. He's not going to bring Covert Cloak. I really don't anticipate it. So Parting Shot was pretty much on every set no matter what, because it allowed us a lot of opportunities to weaken the Raging Bolt, the Groudon, and find setup opportunities with other Pokemon. Not only that, Screens was always an option, but like I said, he does have a lot of different ways to remove Screens. And past that, like an offensive Grimmsnarl was thought of, an AV Grimmsnarl was thought of, but nothing else like that was seriously on the team at any point in time. Bloopy! Bloopy always makes sense here because it can spin and it gets those spins off on everything except for the Roaring Moon. Even if we have to sack him, getting that spin off is valuable. Spore was highly considered here because much like the Parting Shot, I have yet to bring Spore at all. So nobody's brought safety goggles. Nobody has even considered Spore in any capacity against me, which is great. I want it to be that way. So now Spore is a high consideration on Bloopy. Spikes is also a great option. A Jetpack Leaf Storm that we were last time was thought of. A Jet Button is an option as well. Earth Power Leaf Storm, Dazzling Gleam for the Roaring Moon was thought of but never put on the team. Bloopy does good to get that rock away, get those rocks away. Weezingala was highly considered here as a potential lead option. It just led so poorly into the Volcanion, and we did not match up well into that, or the Raging Bolt. So it wasn't lead for too long, but T-Spikes in general are a serious boon to Obo. If he doesn't prep for it very well, which I don't think that he'll have too much for T-Spikes at all, man. He has no removal, and he has no, except for Conk, he has no removal, and I think the only boost that he would have potentially at all is Volcanion. On top of that, our dual stabs do fantastic. We could also be Overheat, Haze, or Clear Smog to make sure that Groudon, Raging Bolt, etc. do not set up in our face. Weezing was heavily considered. And then, of course, Misty Terrain. Misty Terrain was also considered with Misty Explosion. Is it biased because it did well against Chimpact? Potentially, but it was still considered. Azelf was actually considered. At some point in time, Azov was definitely considered as some sort of a potential pivot into the Raging Bolt, able to encore that U-turn out. It was never considered as an offensive piece, more of a defensive piece, which is just not what it does. And I would have preferred to have Yuxi in this matchup. Yuxi would have been fantastic, actually, to do that exact thing that I just said. But Azov just doesn't take hits well. If I switch in and he decides to attack me instead of set up, we die. So Azov probably not going to make the final team, man. And then a Spadef Swampert was considered because I don't think he's going to be Terra Grass on his Raging Bolt. I don't think that makes a ton of sense, and I don't think it's going to have a great way to hit us, but it can just boost past us. And if he's a Terra type to resist ground, or if he's just water, the best that we can do to him is Roar. So bringing Swampert is a little tough here. Ground is pretty good into his team, like Earth Power specifically is pretty good into his team, so we could definitely bring that. And Rocks are very good into his team, so Rocks, if anything, Swampert is considered for Rocks. And then lastly, Grotto. Did not have any consideration, I'm sorry to tell you guys. He had his 1 week. As far as the team that we are bringing and why we are bringing it, our first Pokemon is going to be that Fat Chardy, Recover, Willow, Sacred Fire, and Earthquake Ho-Oh. This is generally speaking going to be our switch into Groudon, at least as long as we have the Chardy Berry intact. And if we're able to keep the Chardy Berry for the late game, we use that on the Roaring Moon. On the Roaring Moon, we're going to click Will-O-Wisp. If he's sub, then so be it. I don't know if he would sub in the face of a potential Brave Bird though. We are going to be max speed still to outspeed that Groudon, and then we're going to have enough defense investment to live a Groudon Heat Crash into an edge. Essentially, we're able to switch this Pokemon in if Groudon's in front of, I don't know, the Goldango potentially, or the Bloopy, and if we brought those Pokemon, no spoilers, and we're able to take that Heat Crash into the edge, we're able to Sacred Fire, Will-O-Wisp, whatever the case may be, if we do suspect that he is not Lumberry. It's a pretty self-explanatory set, and like I said, I'm not super confident that this is the best set in the matchup. I do think this set functions very well on the team that we have, but time will tell if this is really the best set. Next up, we've got the exact same set on Kyurem Black, except our EVs are completely different. The reason we have this set is completely different. So Icicle Spear, Scale Shot, and Fusion Bolt are still the 3 moves of choice because they're still unresisted on Obo's team. For a long time, I had Banded, but locking a move between splitting Volcanion and Screamtail, deciding whether to click Spear or Scale Shot, is very tough, and I didn't like locking. So Wagon suggested that we just go back to the loaded dice set, but we keep this fat set that I have, and this fat set can be used to be a decent pivot into the Groudon, which is initially why he is so fat. And we are loaded dice to get as much damage as possible on Icicle Spear and Scale Shot, and that also gives us the versatility to pack Dragon Dance just in case there's ever a situation where Dragon Dance has the potential to win, like that game against Dell. If we would have had Dragon Dance instead of Scale Shot or instead of any of those moves, we would have won with Kyurem Black. So always packing DD on Kyurem Black is not a negative. This is also primarily our Volcanion check. It's a little bit, it's not primary, it's secondarily. We'll talk about the primary check in a minute, but this can be used to check the Volcanion potentially. We have enough defense EVs to live 2 Precipice Blades from the Groudon. We have enough speed to outspeed the Roaring Moon at +1 in case we get rid of Groudon, in case there's no Sun. There's no harm in having that calc, and then we have the rest into Attack Adamant. We can also live a Roaring Moon Scale Shot if he does decide to go for that. If he is max Adamant, I think boosting, it might not be, it might be Banded. Ooh, I don't remember. There's some calc where we live a very strong hit from the Roaring Moon because Kyurem Black is so fat, and this is the fattest Kyurem Black I think we brought all season. I'm very excited to see what it can potentially do. Next up, Iron Boulder. Iron Boulder is awesome in this matchup. You might be looking at your screen and laughing right now. This set is going to be our guaranteed lead. This Pokemon is very hard for Obo to deal with as a lead matchup, and I struggled so hard with coming up with a lead matchup, but Wagon came at me with this absolutely bonkers set. Mighty Cleave, Close Combat, Solar Blade, and Facade. Essentially what we do is we lead this turn 1, and if it's anything except Volcanion, we're close combating. It does not matter. If it's Volcanion, we're able to Terra Dragon and throw off a Mighty Cleave, pop a potential, what's the rock one? I don't even know. I don't even know what the rock one's called off the top of my head. We're able to pop a potential super berry on a super effective berry that is rock, and we're able to potentially get the burn and throw off some mean facades late in the game because his facade resists are little to none. It is just Skarmory. If he does lead Volcanion and he does decide to switch, or he leads anything not advantageous into the Iron Boulder and he decides to switch, he'll switch into Screamtail or he'll switch into Skarmory, both of which we can close combat and we can go Goldango and be put in a fantastic position because Goldango, our next Pokemon that we're going to talk about in just a second, has no pivots as we've talked about before. We're the same EVs. I don't think there's very much variance on the EVs that we can run here. We outspeed the Roaring Moon. We have enough attack we outspeed the Roaring Moon, we have max attack, and then the rest into HP. This is the crazy set, the craziest boulder set that we brought all season, and there's even still potential for this Pokemon to win in the in-game if we get things chipped enough. And it's going to be we have to TERA turn 1, it's going to be our Volcanion pivot, as uncomfortable as that sounds. Next up, we have Old Reliable, we got Goldango, Mr. Feast. And this is going to be the initial pivot into both Screamtail and Skarmory if either or come. Choice specs with Trick to potentially lock the Raging Bolt into a Calm Mind. Make It Rain, Shadow Ball have no pivots. Thunderbolt with specs can KO a potential Volcanion from full if he does decide for whatever reason that is his switch in, or if he is AV. I like having that as my last click. Like I said, this set is really nice specifically to do damage once we pivot in on that Screamtail or on that Goldango. We do massive damage immediately, and we put him in a super uncomfortable position. The really only way that he can pivot into this comfortably, he can go Raging Bolt, and we will absolutely take that damage on Raging Bolt. He can go Volcanion and predict me to go Make It Rain and not Shadow Ball, or he can go into his AV Groudon. AV Groudon is a pivot into this Pokemon. Will he be AV? I have no idea. We have enough speed to outspeed the Volcanion that is max timid. I don't think he'll be max timid, but it's better safe than sorry with this set. We went max special attack modest with the rest into HP with a rock friendly number of HP. Next up, we have not a super valuable member of the team, easily the least valuable member of the team, and this was almost Wheezing Galar. We have Grimmsnarl, which is a really weird set that I would never bring in a million years, which is why I don't think Obo will expect it. We're Citrus Berry to make sure that we get some form of a recovery into the Raging Bolt and potentially live 2 hits that we might otherwise not live. We're Taunt to prevent that Raging Bolt from setting up. Parting Shot because, like I said, it gives us good opportunity to set up with the Cure in Black, or even good opportunity to pivot into things like the Ho-Oh and be able to live 2 hits that we would not otherwise live. Reflect puts us in good in-game positions against the Roaring Moon, or forces a Brick Break click, and Spirit Break because it does the most damage out of all of our moves and keeps the Raging Bolt down. We're Max Spadef. This is our initial pivot into Raging Bolt. It's not a great one, but it gets the job done. It gets a Taunt off, a Parting Shot off, whatever the case may be. We just needed something to deal with Raging Bolt on this team because nothing up to this point did. And then lastly, would it really be a team without Bloopy? We've got Big Bloopster coming at you once again. Enough speed to outspeed the Groudon, and this time instead of Eject Pack, we're gonna be Eject Button. I am gonna be that Spore set that I talked about previously. It's very easy for us to switch in on that Raging Bolt if he's not Terra Fire and get a Spore off, and if he is Terra Fire, we maintain Earth Power to do damage to him. Or Rapid Spin to get rid of hazards. This can be an immediate pivot into the Screamtail. If turn 1 he leads Screamtail, we can lead that Raging Bolt. We can Terra, Close Combat, pivot into this Pokemon. Whether he gets Rocks up or whether he attacks us, we get a switch into the Goldango, or we get hazards away. Either way, we are winning. We are in a good position. Past that, we have Spikes, and Spikes are here because they help a lot with damage counts late in the game. We only really need one to get things in range of Cure in Black with how much our team is going to force switches on his side. And that is going to be it for the team, ladies and gentlemen. We're about to go into playoffs as per usual. I've got the playoff Jimmy jersey. Things have been a little bit rocky, but that doesn't mean that he didn't make finals twice with this jersey. We're going to try our best to push for finals again, and I really expect to win this game against Obo and talk all of the mess to both Obo and Zooch during the post game. Let me know what you guys think of the team down below, and if there is anything that you would change or that you would do differently. And do not worry, no matter what, win or lose, there will be another video next weekend, because I do plan to do a retrospective if we do lose. Even if we win, I expect to do a retrospective the week prior, the week post, what am I trying to say? The week after I lose or win, there will be a retrospective. The week after our season is over. That's a lot of words. Anyway, with all that being said, guys, we're going to go ahead and jump into this battle with Obo. Be sure to check that out tomorrow at 11 a.m. EST. Thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you, Sonny, for editing this video. And for now, guys, this has been John Jr. signing off.